Here we are. We have spent the first several weeks of our class talking about norm referenced assessments and standardized assessments and all of those high stakes individualized tests with Basel rules and ceilings. And they're things that typically we use for initial meetings or triennial meetings. And today we're going to transition over more toward the direction of everyday assessments that we can do that have a daily impact on whether our students are learning and whether we're choosing the right instructional strategies for them. So we're going to be talking about progress monitoring today. So here are 5 different objectives about progress monitoring. We will be talking about all but one of them in this video. We'll define progress monitoring. You'll be able to understand what the research-based foundations are. We'll talk about the practical applications of progress monitoring quite a bit. For recalling research that supports using progress monitoring as evidence-based practice, you should see the book. And we will talk about progress monitoring as a single subject research design. If you're not familiar with that, you will be in just a little bit of time. So progress monitoring is not in any way a new idea, but it certainly has a great deal of popularity these days, particularly in special education. It was introduced in 1985 by Stanley Dino. He is considered the father of progress monitoring. And he was writing articles back at that time about curriculum-based measurement, or CBM. And with curriculum-based measurement, people were using items out of their actual curriculum. So you would have your reading curriculum, and teachers were pulling different items out of that and creating their own small-scale assessments. And these assessments had 3 goals. One was to measure the effects of instruction on learning, and then to make data-based decisions on instruction, and then to help individualize interventions. And I think that last point is particularly of interest to us as special educators, because individualizing our instruction for each child is just what we do. It's part of every day in our lives. So we're going to be looking at how to do that, how to really zero in on what your students need, and curriculum-based measurement or progress monitoring helps with that. These assessments used to be really truly pulled directly from your curriculum. So if you're using a curriculum called Wonders, you would take your Wonders curriculum and pull things out and you would create your own test. These days, we don't do that so much. It's hard to get a good assessment that's reliable and valid when we're looking at creating them ourselves as teachers, and we know that from what we've read in past weeks about reliability and validity. So now, a lot of the progress monitoring things that we can use are commercially available. So if you've used something like DIBELS or AIMSweb, these are tools that are pretty prevalent in the progress monitoring world these days. And all progress monitoring assessments are designed to be given quite quickly, quite frequently. Some people have even recommended that these assessments be given as often as twice a week. I think that's crazy. I don't think we're going to do it that way. And when it was all initially begun, progress monitoring was for basic academic skills, and that was it. We are going to have an expanded notion of progress monitoring, and it's applicable for every child at every age, at every level of ability. So here's a couple of quick things about what progress monitoring is and is not. I like to think of progress monitoring as the check engine light on the car. That is that's the picture that you see on your dash when the check engine light comes on. And when that light comes on in your car, you don't really know what's wrong with the car. You don't know whether there's like a serious problem that you need to get your car to the mechanic right now, or if maybe you just didn't put your gas cap on tight enough and so that caused an error message that the computer has picked up. So that's what progress monitoring does. It just alerts you. It says, hey, there's a problem, things aren't going well, you probably ought to check this out. What progress monitoring is not is diagnostic. So it doesn't tell you what the problem is. Just like a check engine light doesn't tell you what the problem is, neither does progress monitoring tests. Once that check engine light comes on, you usually need to go to the mechanic and have them hook up to their computer so that they can pull the codes and see what was wrong with the car. And with progress monitoring, we do the same. We realize that the child isn't learning because their graph of learning is just flat. And so then we know, okay, I better check it out. What's really going on with this kid, and why aren't they making progress? So that's the first thing I think that's really important. Also, we use progress monitoring only for the students that we're most worried about. And in special education, that could be all your students. If you've only got 8 students, you might be doing progress monitoring with each and every one of them. In general education, or if you're a case manager with 30 or 40 kids with special needs at the high school level, maybe you're not going to do progress monitoring on every kid. So that's a really important element here, is that progress monitoring is not for every child. We don't need to do it for every child, only for the ones we're worried about. If you look at that kid and you think, I don't know, is that child making progress? Am I going to get them to meet their IEP goals by the end of the year? I'm not so sure. That's the child you want to pick for your progress monitoring project. We definitely do not need to do progress monitoring in every subject area. We can do progress monitoring in only reading, or only math, or only one functional life skill like toileting. You don't have to do progress monitoring for absolutely everything. I think once you understand what it is, you will want to use progress monitoring in more and more areas of your students' lives and learning, but you do not need to do it for everything. And I don't even know that there are good progress monitoring measures in content areas like history or science. I just don't. I can't even think what that would look like. Progress monitoring is really quick. As we mentioned before in the previous slide, these measures are made to be given individually to kids in 1 minute, in 3 minutes, and 5 minutes. So we do say we want to give them frequently. So you want to give this often. You want kids to come to you very often, maybe every week, for these progress monitoring. And so that's important that it's quick. It doesn't take a ton of time. It is a signal about whether your instruction is working. Like I said, if that check engine light comes on, we know there's a problem. If the kid's graph is showing them going up and up and up, we're probably not going to be too concerned. And it is formative assessment. And formative assessments are the ones that we use to form our instruction later. So when we use these assessments, it's not really about judging whether the child is learning necessarily, but it's really a way for us to evaluate whether the instruction that we are providing is meeting the student's needs. And if those two things aren't lining up, if they're not matching, then we need to find a new way to instruct our child. Progress monitoring is not norm referenced. So those tests that we were talking about before, the Woodcock-Johnson, the Wyatt, the Vineland, all of them are comparing a child to other people their age, whereas progress monitoring activities are comparing the child to his or her own ability. We're just looking at, here's Anya. Is Anya doing better now, or is Anya doing worse now? And that is the extent of it. We're not trying to tell if Anya is similar to George or any of the other children in the class. So there are 3 basic applications that we find useful with progress monitoring. And one is that it is really prevalent in, or should be, in the use of MTSS, that's Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, or RTI, Response to Intervention. And probably from other classes that you've taken, you're familiar with this pyramid of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, or RTI, Response to Intervention, where whether it's for behavior or for academic skills, we have universal interventions. That's your first best teaching that every kid is getting, and that's going to be effective at Tier 1 for about 80 or 85% of your students. RTI is what we use when we get into the strategic level, the secondary interventions. That's Tier 2 intervention, and usually this is something that happens before kids go to special education. It's a 10 to 12% of the students, And generally what happens at this secondary tier is kids are getting some targeted intervention in small groups. And we should be using progress monitoring at tier 2 to see whether the targeted interventions are meeting that child's needs. If those interventions are not meeting the child's needs, then we might have to either change up the instruction or change up the instruction again. And when that still doesn't work, then we end up escalating that child's need to the intensive or tertiary intervention. It's just fun to say tertiary. Try it out. Tertiary. Tertiary. That's tier 3, and often we consider that to be special education. So progress monitoring is a really integral part of these multi-tiered systems of support. As well, IDEA 2004 has permitted school districts and states to make laws about special education eligibility determinations by using progress monitoring. So typically for specific learning disabilities and other mild disabilities, we need to do that full battery of testing that we have been talking about for the first month of class. We have to give the IQ test, we have to give the Woodcock-Johnson or the Wyatt, and we have to do all of these things to figure out, is there a discrepancy between what we think the child can learn, that's their intelligence, and what the child's actually demonstrating that they're learning, which is the Woodcock-Johnson or the Wyatt. If those two scores are in alignment, typically we say they don't have a disability. Specific learning disability is a 22-point discrepancy between those two assessments, the IQ test and the achievement test. And so that's a way that we have been doing special education eligibility for things like learning disabilities for just decades. With this law, the 2004 IDEA, now we can look at our progress monitoring data and use those to decide that a child has special education eligibility. So if we've been doing progress monitoring and the child's score isn't changing, and we change the intervention and the score doesn't change, and we change the intervention and the score doesn't change, then we might determine, without going through the full battery of tests, that this kid has a learning disability and should be placed in special education. We're not using that too much in California. I wish that we would. I think it's a really fantastic way that we're not waiting for that child to fail. We're not waiting until the 3rd grade for them to show that discrepancy. It's in the law. It really hasn't come into practice so much. Also, and as I've been talking about through this presentation already, we use our progress monitoring for database decision making. And as we go through all of this progress monitoring and the book that you're reading, we're going to talk a lot about database decision making, and we'll have a whole unit on how to make a good graph. And this is essentially what that's going to look like. Here's little Anya and her progress in reading. And we take a baseline, we find out where Anya was at the beginning of everything before we've started to try anything with her. And then here we go, we've put in place an intervention of some sort, and we're trying to see if she's learning. This is the line that we want to see her follow, this orange aim line. Here, we've put in place an intervention. It's not working for Anya. You can see that because she's not keeping up with where we expect her to go. So then we decide to use these data. These data are showing Anya is not making progress. This intervention is not working. So we're going to try a new intervention. And here we have intervention B. We've changed up something that we're doing in our reading instruction for Anya. And you can see that she's starting to follow along with that orange aim line. Still probably not quite going to get there. This aim line does describe where we want her to be by the end of the intervention period. So is she going to meet that IEP goal? I don't know. It looks like we might need to make another change using this data. So in a nutshell, that's what that's like. We've got, we do our progress monitoring, we take our assessments, and rather than just putting those assessments back on the shelf, we create these graphs and we're tracking. Here's our check engine light. This check engine light said, Anya's not learning, we got to do something for her. And then finally, with progress monitoring, we have a choice of whether we're going to use fluency measures or task analyzed measures. And with fluency measures, we're just talking about how quickly someone can do something. And those early curriculum-based measurement assessments that Stan Dino pioneered were all fluency-based. It was just how quickly can you read? How quickly can you compute? I have taken that and expanded it into task analysis so that it's more encompassing of kids with more kinds of abilities and disabilities. So on this slide, what we are seeing is how progress monitoring really is a multi-purpose activity. We can use progress monitoring for basic academic skills that are fluency based, and that's all of that stuff, like just can you read fluently? Do you know your math facts? Do you remember being in elementary school and you had to take your Mad Minute, and your teacher would give you a sheet of paper with addition and subtraction, and you had to do them as fast as you could within a minute, and you were tracking to see whether you were learning your math facts and you were mastering them? That's what academic fluency is. If you've ever given an oral reading fluency test, like on the Dibbles, you've used Read Naturally, and there's a hot read and a cold read, that's reading fluency. So that's all where the academic fluency-based skills are. I've extended that idea into academic or abstract concepts. So it's one thing to be able to read words fluently and to say them, and it's another thing to be able to understand. And so with our book and with what we're going to be learning about in progress monitoring this semester, we'll look at how can we turn a progress monitoring to use for advanced and abstract skills like reading comprehension or mathematics problem solving. We'll use task analysis to break those things down and create a way to track whether students are becoming more independent. As well, and those of you who are in the moderate severe program for the credential are very familiar, we use task analysis a lot with kids with more severe disabilities. We break down what are the steps that it takes for toileting, what are the steps that it takes for making conversational turns, what are the steps for riding the city bus so that you can get from one place to another. All of that is task analytic, and we can turn those steps and the data that you collect into a progress monitoring graph. And we can then use those data to decide whether our teaching strategies are working. And finally, another thing that we use our progress monitoring for is collecting behavior data. That's the ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. If you've taken your EDSP 424 class, you have taken data on a child's behavior, you've collected those data, you've taken data, you've taught them a replacement behavior, and then you've seen if that creates behavioral change. So academics, functional daily living skills, behavior skills, progress monitoring can be a way to assess each and every one of these items. The book mentions two kinds of curriculum-based measurement, just kind of backing up a little bit. There's mastery measurement and general outcome measurement, and it's a little bit confusing, so I've got some slides here to show you what each one is. With mastery measurement, we work on one skill at a time, and when you master skill 1, then you get to advance to skill 2. And when you can do skill 2 with 80% accuracy, then you go to skill 3. And when you do that with 80% accuracy, then you go to skill whatever number is next. So that just goes on and on. So this, if we were using mastery measurement, maybe we're talking about, we're only going to work on addition facts, single digit addition facts without regrouping. And when you can do that with 80% accuracy, then we'll do single digit subtraction facts. And when you can do that, then we'll go to double digit addition. And when you can go to that, then double digit subtraction. So we're working on one thing at a time. And when you've got that, you go on. When you've got that, you go on. You might see this also in chapter tests for math, for example. Maybe in reading, this would be, we're only going to work on short A sounds until you've got short A, and then we'll work on short E and then short I, and so on. I don't think this is less common. Mastery measurement is less common. The more common progress monitoring tools that you'll find that are available commercially are general outcome measures. And with a general outcome measure, we have got a curriculum-based measurement, and it might have all skills on it. So you have a unit test, or maybe this is the math that you're supposed to get in the entire year. And you teach, and then you test, and then you teach, and then you test, and then you teach, and then you test. And when we've got these general outcome measures that have all of the skills at once, the scores change over time because the difficulty of the test remains the same all year long. It's always just, this is fourth grade math. So maybe in September of fourth grade, you're only expected to get about, 30% correct. And then by the middle, maybe January or February of fourth grade, we would expect you to be at 60%. And then by April or May of fourth grade, we would expect you to be at 80%. So the test doesn't change. It's just the level of expectation that changes. Things like DIBELS do the same thing. They'll have a second grade oral reading fluency measure, and it's the same all year long, even if you're in the very beginning of second grade. But in the very beginning of second grade, you're not expected to do as well as you do later in the year. I can't think of any correlation for general outcome measures to a functional task. If you think of one, let me know. I can't think of any. But these are more common. And then as we come up on the end of this particular presentation, I just want to talk about progress monitoring as a single case design research study. So I think most of us are very familiar with group designs in research, where there's a treatment group and a control group. So maybe you've got you see these a lot in medicine, where a doctor is trying to measure somebody's heart health, and the treatment group will be prescribed maybe additional exercise to try to improve heart health, and the control group is just doing what they always do. And so you'll have 100 people doing additional exercise, and you'll have 100 people doing what they always do, and the experiment will run for a month, and then they perform whatever measurements and tests, and they want to see, is the treatment group doing better than the control group statistically? And in group designed research, it's great because statistically you can say, yes, that works. But there's always someone for whom it does not work. That is always the case. So you'll have, this treatment group where they're doing exercise to improve their heart health. Maybe 85% of people had better heart health at the end of it, and maybe 15% of people didn't change. So that group design, while it says it's, this kind of exercise is really great, if you're in that 15%, it's not mattering. It doesn't matter for you. So that's something about group designs that can be not very helpful when we're special educators. In single case designed research, the individual is his or her own control group. So in the case of Anya, we've looked at this graph before. It's just squished up funny this time. But in this case, this is Anya before treatment here at the baseline. This is what she was like before we did anything for her. And then as we do interventions, we see if this intervention works for Anya. And that's basically, it's a single case design research study. And the important thing is this intervention needs to work for this child. This intervention needs to work for Anya. We don't care if it's worked for 95% of the other people on the planet. If our intervention is not working for Anya, it's not working. And that's just the beauty of progress monitoring. It's really all about who is this individual person that we have and how can we help them do better. Even in the research, when you're reading journal articles in special education, you'll see single case designed research very often, particularly with individuals with severe disabilities. It's kind of hard to find 150 people with Down syndrome to match them and to create a group design research study. It's hard to find 150 people with autism that express autism in the same way so that we can find out whether an intervention will work for them, because they're just so individualized. So you'll see single case design research almost exclusively amongst people with severe disabilities, and it is also the most common and really only design in applied behavior analysis. Applied behavior analysts are completely uninterested in group designs. They think that single case design research is the only way forward. They really definitely are almost religious about it. So that's what I have for you in terms of progress monitoring, just to get started. I hope that that's something that you find interesting and exciting and you're ready to take it on. There was another chapter you were to read this week about how to manage progress monitoring in your busy life, because I know it feels overwhelming, and we'll talk about that in class. All right, I'll see you next time.